Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today, I am thrilled to have with us Tiffany Bova, Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce, author, executive advisor. I could keep going on and on. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you, George, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
You know, Tiffany, we're thrilled to have you here because you're a leader. You're changing the world. You're an author. You're an executive advisor. As we talked about your title with Salesforce, Growth and Innovation Evangelist. I mean, what a title. All these titles are incredible, but they all, someone told me quite a while back that to those who much is given, much is expected. And you're delivering on that promise. I know you are because I've watched your trajectory and your leadership and your career growth. And now as an author, you've written this book. Could you give our audience globally, the millions of people that are watching this interview on Ideagen TV, a brief background on you and your upcoming book, The Experience Mindset, changing the way you think about growth?
Well, first, thanks, George, for the kind words. I'd say it is always doing what I can to give back to a community that has been so good to me over the years. I have been in and around the technology industry for almost 30 years. Started out as an individual quota-carrying sales rep, selling software, then hardware, then services, and I stumbled into this thing called the World Wide Web back in 1999, and was one of the first sort of leaders to bring cloud-based go-to-market models for sales, marketing, and indirect strategies to the market. And then I spent a decade at Gartner as a research fellow, helping small, medium, and enterprise companies around the world reimagine how they can grow their business. That led me to writing my first book, Growth IQ, which has been a ton of fun. It's about 4 years old. She's been translated into 10 languages and has made her way around the world. And now I swore I'd never write a second book. And then I was super inspired to write the new one, The Experience Mindset, which comes out in June. So it's just been a fun ride. I think being an author was never an aspiration for me. My mom was, I think, very surprised with the first book and shocked with the second. I think learning to be an author is very different than learning to be an advisor and a thinker and a doer. A writer was definitely a transition for me.
Well, that is such an incredible introduction to who you are. I've watched your career, you're a friend, you're a colleague, and you've done so many just incredible things. The impact that you're making across the planet, the dedication, the focus. And as an executive advisor, this is what you're doing. You're advising the C-suite on decisions that will impact literally millions of people. And so that leadership is something that is to be admired. And I want to underscore that because it's embedded in your book. I mean, it's such a powerful read. And so why do you blame today's emphasis on the customer experience for contributing to what everyone's been talking about, the Great Resignation, then quiet quitting, and other unfortunate, underscored workplace trends that keep leaders up, every leader up at night?
It's been an interesting journey, I'd say. It was a couple of years ago, I was standing on stage at a event, The Art of, for women leaders in Canada. And I made a statement. I said, I didn't think it was a coincidence that Salesforce is a great place to work globally. It's one of the most innovative companies in the world and the fastest growing enterprise software company. And when I said that, I went, well, that was interesting that I said that. I wonder if I could prove it. And so I left Canada and I went and sat down with our current CMO at the time. And I said, hey, I really want to prove this out. Would you be willing to sort of fund some primary research? And she was kind enough to say yes. And then off we were to the races. And what we really found was ultimately that we've spent a lot of time and energy on redirecting lots of organizations to being more customer-centric and customer-friendly. We've introduced new metrics like net promoter scores and customer satisfaction scores to really see how that work is translating into better experiences for customers. More importantly, improving revenue performance. But what we found when the pandemic hit was it really shined a light on the lack of investments we've been making for a very long time on employee. The Great Resignation was one thing, but quiet quitting is one that has been happening for so long, yet people weren't paying attention. Lo and behold, staff was let go, employees were let go, businesses were closed. Now the economy is opening back up, over the last 12 months or so, and people are finding it difficult to get employees to come back to the office or to even come back to their previous jobs, especially in places like hospitality and retail. There are industries that are really struggling on getting talent back. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it harder to get employees to come back than it is to get customers to buy from you? Well, then maybe there's something underneath that, right? That we have not been as good to our employees and focused on not only their well-being and health and all of those things that are super important, but their ability to do their job day in and day out. I mean, people want to be good at what they do. They want to feel inspired and motivated. And as employers, it's our responsibility to make sure we do that.
That's such an incredible perspective to have, and especially in your role as an advisor to the C-suite. It's so critically important to have that perspective. And I guess within that, I heard a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding that there needs to be a balance. I'd like to diverge just for a moment to see what is your prediction on what the future of work looks like. Will people continue, with 2 or 3 days, on average, or will folks come back more? Will the 5-day work week come back? Do you have any predictions there?
Well, I would say this. I'd say if you're trying to get employees to come back and you're finding it difficult for them to say yes or want to, you have to ask yourself, why not? Is it because they didn't feel the connection at work? It didn't make collaboration easier. It was literally just, I have to commute to work so I can sit in a cubicle and do things that I could do remotely and give myself back an hour, 2 or 3, depending on where you live in the world and how far your commute is. And so are you giving them the reason to want to come back and understanding why they're hesitant? Is it just flat out commute time? I think that's part of it. But if it is those other things like, look, I'm not doing anything in the office that makes it necessary for me to be there. I'm not collaborating with people, on a whiteboard in a conference room, or I am not meeting with my team, or I'm not sitting with my team when we're developing a new product, and I could be doing it anywhere. Then the question really becomes, do you need your people to come in? Do we need to say that work is the same it was 100 years ago before we had all these technology advancements? Is it possible that we can be as productive or more so productive if we give people the ability to come into the office when needed or necessary and then work remotely when not? And so I don't like that. Look, I've worked from home for 18 years. I've not been needed to be in an office for that long. So I can't necessarily say that, I think we should all go back to the office because I don't do that. But what I would say is that I think that there is benefits for having people working together in the same space. And I also think there's benefits of having people work remote. So I think hybrid, kind of success from anywhere by team is an opportunity for employers to reshape what it means to work at their company.
Incredible. Yeah. And that's such great. There you are in your executive advisor role, helping to help individuals in leadership roles in the C-suite understand the ramifications of all of these decisions. Now, in 2020, we were having conversations around the decade leading up to achieving the global goals of the United Nations, Tiffany. And that was the decade runway. A few months after that, the whole world changed. No one knew to what degree, technology would accelerate. Your commute would change. You're in lockdowns. The entire planet, for the very first time in human history, experienced the same exact thing at the same exact time, and now is experiencing the same exact thing coming out of this. And so there's a lot of confusion, I think, by a lot of folks, especially leaders, trying to figure out how do they lead. And so your role in helping to uh, sort of display the empathy, understand the reason why things happened may not be the same reason why they should continue happening, i.e., sitting in traffic for 2 hours every day. Does that make sense?
Right.
I'll leave it up to our audience to decide.
Yeah, and I think the answers to those questions are also different for profit and for nonprofit. I think there are different headwinds facing both of those on what we've just said. If the
Yeah.
nonprofit community isn't able to recruit talent, that has very catastrophic implications to so many in the world that don't have access to the things that we do in more mature markets. And then in the for-profit, it's a different headwind that's coming at them. Recently I was November of last year, I was at the World Economic Forum, and I was talking to a group of leaders in the not-for-profit world about how all this digital transformation and how access technology has changed their ability to fundraise, but has it actually changed their ability to deliver what's needed out in the field? When even though you have a smartphone, it doesn't mean where that person is actually has Wi-Fi capabilities. And how many thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of vials of COVID vaccines went bad on shipping docks because the supply chain had broken down because everything was paper-based. And so there's so much there to say that, as we think about these things, that in the non-for-profit worlds, they may not be called employees in that same way, but those volunteers or those people in the field, like, do they have what they need in order to be successful to do their job? And when it is in the non-for-profit world, it has such great implications to the betterment of the planet, sort of against those UN 30 goals.
That's right. That's right. And so as we look at examples, Tiffany, you have so many examples cited in your book. What are some examples of the companies highlighted in your book that have successfully improved customer experience and also customer experience in implementing people-centered turnarounds?
Yeah, listen, when you think about companies over the last, especially since the cloud is kind of, and the web has really shown itself in 2000, so many companies moved and shifted from being product-led to being customer-led. And moving from product-led to customer-led was a big transformation. I have a lot of major technology and product companies that are like, my product is the reason why we have customers. What we develop and deliver and innovate, that's why people come to us. And the web shifted a lot of that. Now we could offshore manufacturing, the barrier to entry got lower and faster, democratization of access to technology that could allow startups and small businesses to compete against these global enterprise firms, really pushing global enterprise firms to do better because these smaller companies were able to be more nimble and be more customer-led. That forced everybody to sort of pick up their game. And so customer experience became a focus really over the last 25 years, talking about that and that transition. Now we're in this situation because of what we just talked about with the pandemic, and also with the fact that talent is one of the sort of critical fault points for leaders to achieve their goals if they don't have the right talent, doing the jobs that need to be done. So if you don't have employees doing what you need to be done, how is it possible for you to deliver those compelling experiences? Because at the end of the day, the who delivers on those compelling customer experiences, who delivers on those amazing products, who delivers on going the extra mile, it's not your vision statement above your doorway in your manufacturing plant. It's the people in those plants. The employees are the ones that do those things. A company is made up of people, and companies do two things: make stuff, sell stuff. Who makes it? People. Who sells it? People. Now you could argue technology is replacing some of these roles, but you can't just be people-less. Even if you have one employee, right, designing all the things that are happening digitally, bots and online selling and shopping carts and payment, and all that's happening digitally, you still need a person to set those things up. So, getting back to being people-led and understanding the unintended consequences that many brands have made in making decisions that deprioritize people has really put them in a corner and not allowed them to be able to attract that talent they need for future growth.
Incredible insights. And again, I stand in awe, really, by the way you're looking at this, the way you're advising the C-suite on these critical issues. I mean, it is an inflection point on every level at this moment. We had an accelerated technological moment throughout COVID and through the pandemic. And now we're coming out of that and we're saying, okay, here's all of the acceleration that took place. What will remain? What is the best part of it? What can we accelerate further for the good of the company and ultimately the good of the employees, the customers, and obviously the world, right? In the end. And so as we're looking at this, whose responsibility, Tiffany, is it to own the employee experience at a company?
Yeah, it's a great question because, when I started rolling out the research that we did, this was one of the questions that I asked in my roundtables with executives of all size organizations. And in the research, we found nobody really owned employee experience. And if we were talking to the chief HR officer, right, the CHRO, the people or talent officer, if we were talking to the chief information officer, the chief technology officer, or the chief marketing officer or chief customer experience officer, and if you're smaller and you don't have chief roles, just who's responsible for, HR, IT, and the customers. And I'd say it could be your customer service team. Ultimately, all of those leaders own a piece and part of it. So I'm not advising that we need a new quote unquote role. We do need people focused on employee experience that may report into one of those organizations, most likely HR, but they have a cross-functional remit across all the parts of the employee's journey. What do I need every day to do my job? I need a laptop or I need a desktop. Okay, fine. The average enterprise has 900 unique applications in it, and only 27 or 29% of them are integrated. So who bears the brunt of that lack of integration of, I'm an employee and I have to log into 7 things to do my job? When I ask that question, I usually do it around the room. How many of you can do your job with less than 5 applications every day? 5 to 10, 10 to 20. You'll see people's hands. And I obviously start with how many can do your job with 1, and no one's hands go up. You may never get to 1, but ultimately that's why it isn't someone needs to own it. It's that the executive team needs to make sure that when they ask and when they do something for the customer, that they do the same set of questions and investigation on the employee side. So for example, we're going to reduce the effort for the customer. And if we do that for them to do something with us, like open a support ticket or buy something from us, what effort does the employee need to do to satisfy what it is that the customer needs to do? If you don't know the answer to that, that's where to start. If you know that the employee has to do 4 things to respond to the one thing a customer has to do, you're out of balance. So this is just about making sure you keep an eye on the changes you make within the business, from systems and process and people, as well as cultural changes that you do in the name of improving the customer's engagement and experience with you, that you do the same for your employees. It's more of a mindset shift, which is why the book is called Experience Mindset, less about a span of control by a particular leader.
And we learn every day. And in this interview today, I'm learning so much. It's just profound to hear all of these insights from you, looking behind the curtain, understanding what is really happening. And I'd like to ask you, shifting gears a bit, but staying on topic here, on the topic of retention. How can companies innovate, use different methodologies to help with that retention, to retain the best and the brightest employees that are the lifeblood of that business?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the sort of advisor of me, the ex-analyst of me, I want to just answer that question right away. Like, I just want to go, here's the answer. Here are the 3 things you need to do. And I learned a number of years ago that I was probably doing a disservice to my customers by doing that, my clients by doing that. And now, sort of when I'm in front of Salesforce customers and I get the opportunity to meet with executives and they ask me these questions, I now have really tried to be a much better asker of questions. So instead of responding with what I think they should do, I actually will say, I don't know the answer to why you may have a retention problem or how to fix your retention problem. But I will ask you this, based on the last employee survey that you did, what were the top 3 things that employees were most unhappy about? And that answer to that question tells me a lot, because if the executive team doesn't actually know the answer to that question, then it validates what we found, which was lots of surveys are going on, data's getting captured, and nobody's doing anything with the data they're capturing. That validates that point. If they know the answer, then I'll say, great, tell me what the top 3 biggest pain points are for your employees, and they'll rattle them off. And then I'll say, what are the things you're doing to overcome them, fix them, adjust them, whatever needs to happen in order to improve that part of the employee experience, the employee journey. And they'll start to dig into it. So then I get into okay, what were the second question I ask in that sort of retention question is, when you interviewed the last 50 people who left you, especially your high performers, what were the top 3 reasons why they left? That's usually where I'll catch them. They won't know the answer to that. They just let talent walk out the door without understanding, well, why are they leaving? And how could we make sure that our talent doesn't leave? Another one doesn't leave because of that reason, because it could be something really silly, like you don't reimburse education. I want, further education. Not a lot of money, but a little bit of money. Would you give me anything? And they don't do it. It's a simple fix. Or I don't see a career path, or I wasn't trained on this. I mean, it could be really basic things that you could really fix quickly. So I tend to ask those 2 questions versus just prescriptively giving an answer. It may not always be the answer the executive wants, because they are really looking for me to give them the answer. But they actually have the answer to their own question. I just don't think they're looking quite yet in the right way.
That, again, profound, because as you look at that through an experience mindset perspective, to utilize the title of your book, you start to see that the answers do lie oftentimes, if not every time, within the organizational structure itself, and furthermore, within the C-suite and the leadership. The answers lie within that company itself. You're just helping them as an executive advisor drive out and help them see the solutions themselves. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. But I think that this is that blinder conversation, right? They're blinded on it's about the customer exclusively and only the customer. And it's about productivity and profitability, right? And so if I can't measure it, I can't manage it. And some of these human elements of employer-employee relationship are the soft skills, which make executive uncomfortable because they don't know, like, how do you measure purpose? Like, how do I create purpose for my employees, right? How do I get them to be passionate and empathetic? You use those words a bunch in the introduction. And so, ultimately it's that, how do you then measure empathy? How do you measure passion? How do you measure commitment to their job? And so they're like, well, if we can't measure it, why are we talking about it? And that's where leaders have to really stretch into this place where they become a little more uncomfortable about, just because you can't measure it doesn't mean you can't manage towards it. Doesn't mean you can't make cultural decisions that create an environment where these things organically happen because it's rewarded collectively versus it's a KPI you're chasing. Because the KPI, if you're chasing a KPI and its cost, you're going to make very different decisions. And you're going to trim the fat really thin until all that's left is people are working at 150% capacity, which is impossible. And then you have a burned out employee base. So, sometimes chasing the KPIs, it delivers a really bad environment, a toxic culture, and you miss your goals anyway, because you just don't have the people to do the work.
Well, and that's the brilliance of what you're describing, because so many companies are driving just toward the KPIs. And it makes sense, right? They're trying to drive the bottom line, because the more they can do, the more they can hire, the better the company does, the more good they can do even. And so it's a cycle. And it's important to almost step back for a moment, as they say, to see the forest through the trees here, to understand that even though you can't exactly measure it, you can measure it because you see it in the optimization and the success of the company in the end. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if you did a regression analysis and said, wow, our pipeline of talent used to be 3 times the size it is now. And then you pick a date. I'm making this up as an example. January 1st, 2019. I want to try to stay away from the timing of the pandemic. So I almost want to pretend it wasn't there, but I'll go back to 19. Okay. So we'll say January 1st, 2019, your pipeline for talent used to be 3 times the size it is now, and pretend we're at January 2020, right? Nothing has happened that disrupted the entire planet, right? We're in that sphere of time. Well, could you say, well, I'm going to go look at what our employees that have been leaving or even work here are saying on Glassdoor, as an example. And like, wow, come right here. All of a sudden, there was this spike in negative sentiment of our employees, sort of airing grievances out on Glassdoor, as an example. What changed? And I can directly correlate that we started to get this negative sentiment. So if people were looking to work here and they went there to see, well, what do employees are they saying? I'm not even going to apply anymore. So we could see over time that, as our pipeline of talent started to decline, we saw an increase in negative sentiment online. I'm using this as an example.
Sure.
Is that a fair example? Sure. Are you even looking at what's happening? That's a very HR conversation, right? It's a talent conversation. But on the backside of that is, why is that happening? And you could look into your base now to see, are they quiet quitting? Are they engaged? Are they passionate? All those things. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can survey. Well, if you survey, then you have to look at the data. And if you look at the data, then you have to make some changes. So,
Sure.
You can start to, if you're willing to have that mindset and be open to, am I putting the same level of rigor against my employee experience journey as I am my customer experience journey? If you can't look in the mirror and feel like you're even close, then you have a retention, a recruitment, an engagement problem.
Incredible. That describes it all right there. And so the experience mindset can be scaled, clearly. What specific processes and functions can help scale the experience mindset? What is it? Are there specific tools to scale it?
Yeah, I actually broke it down. I took advantage of Levitt's PPT framework, the People, Process, and Technology framework that he did a long time ago, back in the 60s. And I added culture, so PPTC, and across people, technology, process, and culture, there are lots of things you can be doing. I'm just going to focus on tech for just a second. In the survey, we found that the largest gap between the realities that the C-suite thought were happening versus the realities of what was actually happening with the employee was the largest, meaning 53% of executives of the C-suite felt the technology they were using was efficient and effective to allow people to be successful, at work. Only 32% of employees agreed with that statement, and only 23% of customer-facing employees agreed with that statement. There is so much underneath the technology conversation. But number 3 on that list of what was holding companies back from growth, tied for number 1 was outdated tech. Number 3 was outdated processes. So that's the process side of this, right? Do you have processes that were built before you went digital, before you went mobile, before people were working remotely or hybrid? Do you have processes that were, are no longer effective because you no longer need to do those things, like fax someone a PO? Well, now you can email it. You could send it via WhatsApp. You could text it. Lots of other ways to get it to them. But that's still a step in the process that should be eliminated. And so process is one that just creates incredible busy work for people, which is not inspiring. They would rather have you take that off their plate from an automation, AI, machine learning, technology standpoint, than do these manual, mundane tasks, because that isn't sort of joyful work. That doesn't challenge them to be better every day. That literally is, I've got a paycheck, and they're just quiet quitting, right? Because they're just not inspired to be there. And those are just 2 of the 4. But when you get underneath people and you get underneath culture, that's where you get into career development, career opportunities, investment in learning. And then culture is, are you a great place to work? Like, are you doing well by doing good? Is it purpose over profit? Is it just profit? Is the culture someplace that you want to show up every day because you believe in what the company's doing? And I said that very quickly in 60 seconds, but that is years of work that unravels those things, and then years of work in order to put those things back together. It is a living organism. There is no end date, right? You have to continuously be invested in and dedicated to making sure you keep balance across those 4 areas.
Tiffany, clearly you are that expert. You are that expert and that leader who can, and thank you for this, who can and did write the book on the experience mindset. What inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, I would say that, many years ago when I was making the transition from being a Gartner analyst to coming to work at Salesforce, I chose to work here when they offered me the opportunity because I really aligned to the values of the company. Our CEO, Mark Benioff, is a trailblazer in sort of purpose over profit. As part of the Business Roundtable, he's very much aligned to all the things I valued, as a human being, and also where I was in my career. And so when I made that statement on stage, I had mentioned, right, we're a great place to work, we're highly innovative, and we're the fastest growing enterprise software company. That inspired me to say, if it's true for us, I'm going to guess it's true for others. And if I can help people clear out some of the misperceptions on the power of putting those 2 efforts together, I need to do that. And I think the early response in our first wave of research really validated for me that this is super obvious, but yet not everyone's doing it. This is really people-based, which many CEOs claim they are, yet when push comes to shove, they always default to what's best for the customer and not the employee. And I felt like it was something that had tangible impact to the people of organizations, not just to the executives themselves.
Incredibly profound and just, again, awe-inspiring to think that you've taken all of this knowledge and put it into an amazing piece that can be shared with the world, ultimately called the experience mindset. And so if I'm a leader and I want to take that first step, that leap into developing and implementing an experience mindset in my company, what should I do?
The first thing I'd say is look at your top priorities of the organization. What are they? What are your goals for the year? And see how much of it is customer oriented, how much of it is product oriented, how much of it is employee oriented. It doesn't need to be 30, 30, 30. It doesn't need to be perfectly balanced. But what I'm trying to find out, right, or what I'd like you to try to find out is, are you over pivoted to one and not the other 2? Is it a little more balanced between 2 and the third is completely ignored? Like, start with the priorities of the organization. The second thing I'd say to do is take an inventory of the KPIs that run the business in your executive team. What are the KPIs that you are holding accountable for your executive leaders? And if you're a very small organization, it's kind of yourself. Like, what do you use to track the health of the business? As you get larger, you're going to have more people involved. But what are those KPIs? And ask yourself the same question. How many of them and how much of them are oriented towards customer versus how many of those KPIs are oriented towards employees? The truth of the matter, unfortunately, is what gets done is what gets measured. What people want to spend their time on is what the priorities of the business are and what their key performance indicators are actually being tracked for their success in their role. That is the realities. I mean, we're human. That's where we're going to put our time. And so if those KPIs are totally focused on customer, you've got no room for employee. And if you can do that inventory, then it's going to give you a good indication of where you have a gap. The next would be to look at your last employee survey to get a pulse of what are people thinking and feeling, and are you ignoring signals that are going to get you in trouble 6 to 12 months from now? And then the last one would be get out of your office, get off the Zoom, and go meet with your people, your teams, your customers. Make sure it gets part of your normal day-to-day routine, that every day you talk to an employee, not one who reports to you, but somebody in the organization, and you talk to a customer. And then you start asking them these questions of your hypothesis. They will tell you. And probably 90 days from the day you start doing this, you're going to have changes, at least I hope so, right? Changes and shifts into the priorities of what you think is going to help you grow the business. You're going to clear out things that are just noise and not doing any good for anybody, really. And then, you're going to have a much healthier culture because of it. So, those are things that are tangible. I'm not telling you to go, hire a consulting firm and spend 2 years, uncovering what's going on. I'm telling you, spend, 30 days doing what I told you, 30 days sort of putting together what you think will be required to make some adjustments, 30 days socializing that, making additional adjustments, and then getting everybody and get everybody going in the same direction. That's what I'd say leaders should be doing first.
Tiffany Bova, Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce, Executive Advisor, and author of The Experience Mindset. How can folks find out more about you and your book?
Well, the Growth IQ is out now. As I said, it's translated in 10 languages around the world. The Experience Mindset comes out June 6th. 2023. It's going to be translated in a couple. So far have been a repeat, Korea and the Commonwealth, and a couple others. But that comes out June 6th. And then you can follow me on LinkedIn, Tiffany Bova. On Twitter is at Tiffany_Bova. And then Instagram and Facebook are Tiffany Bova. So, please follow me, follow my work. I'd love to hear feedback on what you agreed with, didn't agree with, what you're hearing and seeing out there in the market. Also, I love hearing when people challenge what I'm saying, because I think that's the rich discussion, and between different points of view, comes a better one. So I'm always open to that as well.
Tiffany Bova, changing the world, leading the way, and helping to share the Experience Mindset, out June 6th. Buy your copy, pre-order. I assume you can pre-order.
You can right now on sort of all of your favorite, whichever it is, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever you are in the world, you can get your hands on it.
Tiffany, thank you so very much for the inspiration, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, George, for supporting my work. I appreciate it.
It's an honor. Thank you.